Greetings and salutations from the People's Dispatch studios here in New Delhi. I'm Siddhantani. It's Monday and it's our first episode of the week of Daily Debrief, where we bring you some of the top stories from around the world. Today on the show, we're talking about why the governors of Texas and Florida are treating migrants in the US like they are inanimate objects. We're talking about why the Canadian government is pushing ahead with the coastal GasLink pipeline project despite serious resistance from locals, and the future or the contentious future of Project Cheetah in India. First up, in a cruel political stunt, over the past week, the governors of the US states of Texas and Florida sent immigrants by bus and plane from their states to areas governed by Democrats and considered by Republicans as immigrant-friendly sanctuary cities. On Thursday last week, Greg Abbott, that's the governor of Texas, loaded up 2 buses with immigrants seeking sanctuary and moved them to the Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C. That's very close to the residence of Vice President Kamala Harris. The same day, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis flew 50 immigrants to Martha's Vineyard, a holiday resort for the super-rich in the state of Massachusetts. Abbott has consistently been relocating immigrants and asylum seekers to Democrat strongholds without notice for those regions to prepare for their arrival. Thousands of people as a result, over 10,000 as a matter of fact, have ended up at these locations with no idea what happens next. To understand if this is anything more than a vile attempt to taunt political opponents without a care at all about the lives at stake, Anish Radhakrishnan joins us now. Anish, good to see you for the first time this week. First up, what is the legal situation regarding the shipping or busing or whatever you call it of people in this case, and how is it that the governors of these 2 or other states as well are using immigrants or treating them like they were, any other packaged goods that you may order online?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest question here because one of the things is that you can't really transport people. Like that is one of the reasons why a whole host of civil rights activists have talked about in this case and highly criticized the actions of both Texas and Florida is because you can't really ship someone or send someone, transport someone without their consent. Now, whether or not their consent was even taken is a big problem. Another issue is that a lot of the bus drivers, even or the contractors that operate these buses, are prevented by a legal contract from having any communication with officials in these sanctuary cities, as they call it, for undocumented migrants. Now, the problem is that when something like this happens, and then send people without any communication, without any warning.
Warning, preparation,
Essentially,
notice,
you're essentially just stranding them in the middle of a city, with even volunteers having issues to organize help for them. You already have volunteers trying to use kind of news scoops just to arrange for some level of help, and because some of them include children. We already had a case of an infant being one of the people who were just left stranded in front of the vice president's residence, and that only shows that the kind of as you said, heartlessness of the governments in the state administrations in Texas and Florida. The problem can be wider, and it becomes something. It is not uncommon. First of all, let's begin with the fact that it is not uncommon for many of these migrants to themselves opt for sanctuary cities because that's where they are safer. That's where they are not harassed by local enforcement officials and so on. But when you do something like this without even, many of them do not even speak the language. Many of them have no idea how to get through, and they're just put into very vulnerable conditions without their consent.
Right. Clearly, I can't see any other way of looking at this other than like a really cruel way in which to make some kind of political point. What is the political purpose behind all of this? Of course, it's showboating and it's gimmicky and it's a stunt. but there are people and real people and their lives at stake.
Yes, exactly. The point is always this long-standing complaint that the Republicans have, at least Southern Republicans in the United States, have talked about is migrants just turning up in their back doors without warning, and the Democrats in East Coast cities just allowing it. That's how they look at it. The targeted busing of these migrants to some of the centers of the elites also show that the whole point is for them to show that just taste your own medicine sort of thing. But the problem is that this is not how you make a point. You are actually putting a whole host of civil liberties at stake, and that is where the bigger problem is. On top of that, there is the fact that a large part of what the Republicans claim about undocumented migrants in their states is not really based on facts. In many cases, a majority of the cases are not people who have crossed the borders and going through precarious conditions, even though that's a sizable number already. But most of them are people who had issues with their visa applications and so on. So it is not really about how whether there are infiltrators, as they call it, but it's about how efficient your own system is in actually making it easier for migrants to apply, to continue working, and to be, legal citizens and residents in your own country. That is something that they do not really want to talk about. They just, because this kind of thing always, caters to a certain kind of populist, right-wing populist narrative. It just makes it easier for them. And obviously, with the upcoming midterm elections, the point just becomes exacerbated because they're trying to consolidate their right-wing vote base. There are hordes of people who are just trying to turn up to their and steal their jobs or something like that. A whole set of alarmist notions that are very baseless and devoid of facts.
Alarmist, and I suppose also given the demographic nature of many of these migrants, clearly bigoted as well, Anish. All right, Anish, we'll ask you to stick around for another minute or two because we're talking next about Canada's coastal gas pipeline, a region also that you are covering. So we'll come to you for some insights on that story as well. Canada's coastal GasLink pipeline project is back in the news, a cycle, of course, that activists on the ground believe that the project should never be out of. This is with the arrival of drilling equipment on Indigenous lands to drill under the Wet'suwet'en River. Locals say this river is a source of drinking water for several Wet'suwet'en villages, as well as breeding grounds for salmon for thousands of years. Defenders of the land who have set up checkpoints to restrict access to the area to project workers say, and I quote, Wet'suwet'en territory is unceded, unsurrendered, and sovereign, and Wet'suwet'en people have never provided free, prior, and informed consent to the coastal GasLink pipeline's destructive construction operations. End quote. And yet, the Canadian state is putting its might behind seeing the project through at what seems like any cost. Anish is still with us and has more information on the latest developments. Like we were saying, Anish, the Canadian government clearly, and as well as their private contractors engaged with this project, clearly looking to push ahead with drilling work and other activities relating to the pipeline. What is the latest that you're hearing from reports on the ground?
Right now, the Giddington checkpoint, which is currently at the front lines of the struggle, has talked about the fact that the drilling machine that is required for the drill site to the drill work to go ahead has been transported to the drill site, and this drill site is at the headwaters of an important river on the Wet'suwet'en lands. Now, the thing is that this all of everything, pretty much everything that has been done so far in the construction of the pipeline is concerned has been done very clandestinely, and that only makes it worse because and obviously they are backed by court injunctions that allow them a sort of immunity from activists accessing the drill sites and the construction sites, and very often that only caters to a certain kind of a police state where activists and people who are protesting the project are being put under heavy surveillance, are going through significant prosecutions that just that may not stand legal scrutiny in the future, but it is putting an immense set of costs on them to continue with their activism of protecting their lands and their waters even.
What are some of the arguments being made, Anish, on this front? We heard that there was a week-long sort of set of activities held where these lands and the river particularly were shown to people, including villages that are serviced by the river, as well as we saw fishing grounds as well. What is exactly the set of demands as it stands now, apart from, of course, the cessation of construction activities?
Well, the cessation of, as you said rightly, cessation of construction activities at the center of the entire movement right now. But the movement is also talking about a larger issue that Canada really does not want to face with right now, which is sovereign rights over Aboriginal and Indigenous lands in Canadian within or surrounded by Canadian territory. Now, Wet'suwet'en is one of those lands where there is no annexation treaty, there is no treaty of cessation being done by any of the traditional leadership. So far, the legality of it being, whether or not it is even part of British Columbia or much less part of Canada as a whole, is something that is still in a sort of legal gray area, a sovereignty gray area of sorts. And that is where the issue is at the center of this entire movement. The resistance is talking about asserting Indigenous sovereignty over their own lands, lands that were never given up to Canadian authority, no legal treaty, nothing of sort, apart from this something called as the Indian Act, a very contentious set of colonial era law that has only treated lands as either part of a state or as part of a treaty. And even in that case, there are issues that really needs to be taken care of, and something that Canada does not really want to deal with right now. The issues will obviously be a highly contentious thing. We already had the British Columbia State Supreme Court ruling in favor of the construction, in favor of the pipeline. But obviously, if something like this goes to the Supreme Court, and if it does, there is a set of judicial precedent that really needs to be taken into account. And that is something that the Wet'suwet'en activists are really talking about, which is, again, as at the risk of reiterating myself, of asserting their own sovereignty on their own lands.
Thanks, Anish, for both those updates and for your time today. And finally, we're wishing India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, very belatedly perhaps, a happy birthday for the 17th of September. On that great day, Modi spent some time admiring the start of another project by his government. That is, if we are to believe the headlines, already a massive success. 70 years after local extinction, cheetahs are being reintroduced to Indian forests, specifically the Kuno National Park in the central Indian state of Madhya Pradesh. 8 cheetahs were relocated from Namibia into a quarantine enclosure at the national park before they will presumably roam free. Despite the momentous occasion, though, scientists and conservationists are less enthused by the prospect on multiple fronts. Pragya Singh is with us to explain the thinking behind India's Project Cheetah. Pragya, the relocation of big cats seems like it's a little bit more complicated than just sort of flying them over, let's say, from, in this case, Namibia, and putting them in a nice piece of forest land and saying, have at it. What are the sort of scientific complaints or objections or even reservations that you're seeing at this point now that these 8 cheetahs have been sort of brought into India?
Yeah, Siddhant. So basically, the Kuno National Park, where these cheetahs have been brought from Namibia, was being prepared, ostensibly being prepared to accept lions from within India. Now, they were supposed to come from the western state of Gujarat, which is the Indian Prime Minister's home state, Mr. Narendra Modi's home state. But there they are seen in Gujarat. They are seen as the pride of Gujarat. So nobody wanted to. The state government did not want to part with these lions, so they were never brought to a safer habitat in Madhya Pradesh in Kuno. Where now these cheetahs have, 8 cheetahs have been brought in. The thing is that, does it mean that the Asiatic lion has lost a home? Probably it does mean that, because since 2013, the Supreme Court of India has said that these lions should get a new home, which hasn't happened. And 413 lions have died in the Gir forest in Gujarat in roughly 5 years, between 2013 and 2018. So while translocation of a species that has gone extinct in an area is always a welcome development, but the scientists are raising the question: was this particular reserve prepared for them? Does India have the capacity to host more cheetahs? Because the plan is to bring more. And it raises the question that how much is being spent on this project is also unknown. The budget is naturally linked to how many animals you're going to be able to support in India, in Indian forests. In fact, there are concerns that other forests than the one in Madhya Pradesh province, which has been picked, would have been more suitable for the cheetah, but we don't know why were not picked. There's an entire host of concerns which the environmentalists are raising. In particular, the issue is that there's the Great Indian Bustard. There are foxes, there are birds, there are trees, there are deer, there are buffalo, there are hogs. There's a wide variety of animals, birds, trees, plants, which are at great threat of extinction in India. So the environmentalists are asking why are you singling out one animal and making a very big show out of it, spending a lot of money on just the day when you bring that animal in, which is fine. You're making the biodiversity more diverse, that's okay, but you cannot have one animal prioritized. You need to do something for all the animals.
Right. And I guess big cats being Pragya at the top end in that sense of the food chain, they require a great deal more in terms of the kind of prey that there is, as well as conflict with the existing population of, let's say, tigers, for example, in Madhya Pradesh, which according to a different project of the Indian government is doing reasonably well, and tiger populations seem to be growing. But at the same time, so is human habitation, and that's constantly a struggle that's ongoing as well. We can assume, and we're seeing sort of how varied the set of interests of Prime Minister Narendra Modi are, and we saw from pictures that he clearly seems to also have an interest in wildlife photography and an interest in conservation, I think. So even though there are questions that are unanswered, such as how much is being spent on the project and why exactly Kuno was the national park that was selected, surely there's a plan in place, and surely they've prepared well for this.
So Siddhant, first to answer your question about the conflict between humans and animals. So 1,579 elephants, 1,579 people were killed by elephants in 3 years up to 2021. And then there were about 200 elephants themselves which died due to electrocution, etc., etc. There are tigers who killed 125 people in the same period of 3 years, 3 preceding years, and it's not a lower number of people who get killed by a range of other wildlife which is coming into conflict with human beings in India. So Siddhant, the other aspect is that the cheetah, before it went extinct in India, was able to find a certain amount of prey for itself in the form of smaller deer and large deer and animals from related species. Now there is a big question as to the availability of the cheetal deer, the black buck, etc. And again, the question here is whether these animals, once they're released into the wild, right now they are in quarantine, whether these animals will be able to survive in India or not, which is making a lot of people wonder. You see, the national elections in India are in 2 years. And 2 years is, as you would guess, not much time to really assess the success or failure of such a project. There are a lot of doubts and misgivings right now, but perhaps a decade is the timeline that we should assume. So how is Mr. Modi or his government benefiting from this? Is it that there will be no questions asked after 10 years about a project like this? Because this government does have a habit of having a very big show every few weeks, and then an even bigger show every few months. And this seems to be joining that long series of projects which are launched, and then there is no question or answer later on about how that project really did.
All right.
The other aspect here is that the Kuno National Park, the area in which they have been released, is about 570 square kilometers. So what the experts have been telling us, we recently spoke to Ravi Chellam, who's a very well-known wildlife biologist. He said that the tragedy of this project is that nobody really prepared for it. The lack of preparation is also another rather regular feature of this government, where the announcement itself becomes the project. Who will be around after 10 years to assess whether it worked or not, when the benefits can be reaped today? The Prime Minister has not announced the conservation of the great Indian bustard, which is not a less important bird, but it's not a ferocious animal that looks like it's out on the hunt. And in fact, it was sort of tragic that the Prime Minister during the launch also said that, well, there was a time when Indians used to release pigeons in the air. And that was a pastime of many of the rich and famous in India in the pre-independence and post-independence period. But it was also an important cultural activity. It's still an artifact of important occasions in India. So there is no need to offset one bird against another animal and to sort of prioritize a ferocious-looking animal because you think it matches with your politics. And naturally, this has led to a war of words, as usual, between the Congress party, the challengers, and the BJP, which is in power.
Whatever anyone else might say, Pragya, Narendra Modi's birthday from here on out will no doubt be remembered as the day the cheetah set foot on Indian soil once again. Thanks very much, though, for all of the information that you actually shared with us in our discussion around that story. And for your time today. And with that, we wrap up this episode of Daily Debrief from Pragya, myself, and the entire team here at People's Dispatch. Thanks very much for watching. As always, for details on these stories and all of the rest of the work we do, head over to our website, peoplesdispatch.org, and give us a follow on the social media platform of your choice. We'll be back same time, same place tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.